Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Um, really glad to see you all here. And I want to say thank you so much for being here this morning. And I feel like there's a lot of things to say, and part of me wants to say them, and part of me wants to say, you know what, we're here this morning to do the things and the kind of work that we came to the university to do, and that's what I think we should do. This is, as you know, this Humanities Without Walls project has been many years in the making to get to this point, and very grateful to the Mellon Foundation for trusting us to try to do something that I think has many aspects that are potentially very innovative. And one of them is, and it's the part that may be less sort of obvious, but I think it's the part of it that appealed to me from the very start, which is, as someone who's been somewhat disciplinarily promiscuous, but institutionally monogamous. This is the only job I've ever had. I finished my PhD and I came to the University of Illinois. But I've always felt confined by the whole departmental apparatus of the university. It doesn't seem to fit well for me, and I think it doesn't fit well for a lot of people. And increasingly, the model on which universities are based is sort of a problem, right? In all kinds of ways. And what was interesting to me about Humanities Without Walls from the start was that it seemed to me to be a way not only to create new opportunities for new and innovative kinds of research, but also that it was a way for us to think about working as scholars together without having to worry about institutional confinement. And as I think, in some ways I think this is a product too of having lived through the kind of economic crises that we've seen happen in higher education over the past 15 to 20 years, the sort of steady erosion of funding, especially for public universities, and realizing that, even while we're in many respects still a very well-resourced university, we can all be grateful for the incredible library we have here and the research board and so on, that nevertheless there was no way we were ever going to have all of the resources at our disposal to do the kind of work we wanted to do, nor would our colleagues at other institutions with whom we also wanted to collaborate to enrich our work. And so Humanities Without Walls comes from those impulses and from the sense that we need to think about what we do as being the core of the reasons that we've come to university life, to scholarly life, and to find ways to do the work we need to do in a kind of extra institutional way. That's not to say, of course, that Humanities Without Walls doesn't rely on a kind of institutional apparatus, right? So the first thing I want to do today is thank Jason Mirek, who's our project manager for Humanities Without Walls. Most of you have been in touch with Jason and you've just met him, so he's sitting right here in the blue shirt. And Jason has done a tremendous amount of work to organize today's event, so I want to thank Jason very much. I also want to thank Kelly Delahanty, who's sitting next to Jason in the blue and white dress. Kelly's our Humanities Without Walls communications coordinator, and so all of the work to try to get the word out about these things and to kind of make it appear coherent and to have it help have it all make sense is due in large part to Kelly's efforts. So thank you, Kelly, very much for your efforts as well. So I think the best thing for us to do is get started. The purpose of today's workshop is really to kind of try to orient any faculty who are interested in getting involved in the Global Midwest Initiative to the initiative itself. And as many of you know, prior to getting the $3 million grant to really launch the consortium, we spent 18 months in a planning phase, and that planning phase was funded by a smaller grant from the Mellon Foundation that allowed the Humanities Center directors from the other 14 institutions to get together with me and to talk about what we thought we could do. What could we really do together that we couldn't do alone? What kinds of initiatives really mattered to us? And it was from that 18-month process that the Global Midwest Initiative and the predoctoral summer workshops came about. And so in that same phase, it seemed important to do a little testing and to see, does anybody actually want to collaborate across institutional boundaries? Is this interesting to people at all? And can they do it if they want to? And then finally, can we actually manage the administration of that? Because it means moving some money across institutional boundaries. And we knew that it could be done. Our colleagues in New York State at Syracuse University, Cornell, and Rochester had been doing it. We're very fortunate to follow them. I want to actually also thank Greg Lambert and Tim Murray, who are two of the PIs on that New York State Humanities Corridor, because they were incredibly generous and sharing their initial failures with us. And it's always great to learn from other people's trials and errors. And we've become collaborators as well, sharing information, and they've been tremendously supportive of our effort and given us a lot of great advice. But we did learn from them that it could sometimes be challenging to just move small chunks of money from one institution to another. And so that was another challenge. Could we actually do it? So I was very, very pleased when two of our colleagues here at Illinois were interested in being our guinea pigs. And they're here with us today to talk about their experiences. And I think what they have to say will be very useful to all of us in helping to understand what it means to collaborate in the humanities, which is something that we don't do a whole lot of. It's not something we're necessarily trained to do in the humanities. Most of us got into it because we like to go off into our world by ourselves and do our thing and be left alone. But this kind of work that we're talking about in Global Midwest really demands collaboration. We're interested in seeing what new kinds of work can come from it. We have colleagues in the room who are from fine arts who are far more accustomed, fine and performing arts who are far more accustomed to collaborating than we are in the humanities. And when we have our September event in Chicago, we'll be hearing from more people about different modes of collaboration. Why do it? What can come from it? What are the pitfalls? What are the triumphs? And so on. So I hope that a lot of you are able to come to that as well. But we'll be hearing from Ted Underwood and Charlie Wright today about their experiences with that. And then after we hear this morning from Maria Bonn and Kevin Hamilton about the publication initiative that we're trying to develop, we'll have, and when Ted and Charlie are finished, we'll have lunch, and then we'll have time for people to get together and work in small groups and talk about developing proposals, and we're here to help you with that in any way we can. So it's meant to be a fairly informal day. To that end, as I introduce our colleagues Maria and Kevin, I'm going to do so knowing that most of you already know each other. I'm going to make these introductions relatively brief and just say that some of you may know Maria a little less well because she's fairly new to our campus. She arrived last year. She's a senior lecturer in the Graduate School of Library and Information Science here and teaches courses on the role of libraries in scholarly communication and publishing. She's formerly served as the Associate University Librarian for Publishing at University of Michigan in their library, where she developed a lot of really innovative e-publishing initiatives and has been a real pioneer in thinking through the kind of future of the library, future of scholarly publishing, what it means to publish in this new sort of digital world that we're involved in, and is really fearless, I think, in trying to experiment and help us all think in new ways about how we get our work out there into the world and find audiences who are interested in reading it. And Kevin Hamilton, many of you know already, is an artist and researcher here. He has served in new media and painting programs as a leader there in art and design. He holds lots of different appointments here, has lots of different roles. His primary appointment, again, is in art and design and media and cinema studies. He also has appointments in the Center for Arms Control, Disarmament, and International Security. Probably many of you know that Kevin's been working on a really fascinating project for a while about nuclear test films, which is amazing. He's co-director of the Center for People and Infrastructures in the Coordinated Science Lab, and he leads the Learning to See Systems, which is this interdisciplinary research and training effort that's funded by the Graduate College. Very active in digital humanities and arts efforts. He's also a Dean's Fellow, an Associate Dean in the College of Fine and Applied Arts, which we desperately need. Kevin's brilliance and leadership there, so thrilled to have him doing that. So I just want to welcome both Maria and Kevin. I think Kevin's going to speak first, and they're going to help us think through some new ways of thinking about getting our work out there. So, Kevin, thanks.
feels like a big deal. It feels like you're launching this, Dianne. I think this is a great occasion to have everybody here. Really looking forward to the next few years of what this looks like for our campus and beyond. That's okay for now. There's not so much detail here that we need it. So Maria and I talked about keeping this somewhat short so we can get to some time for questions and answers. So we're each going to talk about 15-20 minutes and then see what kind of discussion comes up. I put a few slides together just to try to think a bit from the perspective of a team or individual with prospective collaborators who's thinking about spinning up a project, a grant proposal, where they might be producing things they're not used to producing. That's kind of the perspective I'm taking here. I'm focusing very briefly on the why, what, and how of that, and not on the where of that. And I think Maria is going to be dealing with that more substantively and has more experience with that here. So I just wanted to kind of offer in this presentation less an immersion in particular projects and more a kind of rubric for how you might think about approaching this question of making something besides a traditional book or article. So you'll see some examples, but I think I'm going to put my rubric forward first. Just as a kind of background here, Dianne gave you some. So I've been involved for about 5 years now in a collaboration with a humanist, Ned O'Gorman, in the Department of Communication. We're working on a corpus of films produced by the Air Force around the nuclear testing regime and a ginormous pile of PDFs and documents and other ephemera that come in off of eBay and weird places, and trying to do a critical analysis together. And so we keep having to make other kinds of objects. So we're working on a website that allows you to navigate these films with some additional information, linking actual PDFs to points in the films, visualizations that help us understand these films better structurally, and actual print documents, but different kinds of print documents than you might be used to seeing. So we're thinking about these outcomes a lot, and this is the context that I see us working in. This is not about seeing that everybody's talking about digital and going to make something digital. This is not about mere opportunism about the kind of objects we produce. This is about attending to what seems to be a very shifting space right now in terms of what some folks in a very interesting event I wish I was present for at Michigan a little while ago called our knowledge infrastructures. We have a changing space here in terms of definitions of authority, the kind of what is, how do we think about what happens when you've got group authorship or group review today? What happens when humanists are looked to participate in some of the same structures that scientists are more used to in terms of large teams? How do we talk about credit in that situation? There's all kinds of ways in which the infrastructures by which we produce new knowledge are changing. And that is one of the best reasons to be thinking about new kinds of objects and forms for what we produce, I would say. It would be to respond to that, to participate in that, to lead in that space. Because some of these shiftings are not even shiftings we're all that excited about. They're things beyond our control, and we want to be in there responding to them from a community of practice and principles and other things. So I'll talk briefly about why publishing in new forms, a little bit about what they might be, and a little bit about how we might do it. And I'm going to say, I'm using the word publish almost irresponsibly here. I'm talking about outcomes more than the actual question of what is publishing. And I think that we need to ask that too. I think Maria will probably address that. So I'm more just looking at this question of why would you produce something other than what you normally expect to see in your discipline. So why publish in new forms? A few reasons here. One very common one is to share your archives as well as your arguments. And I'm basing these points on what I've seen moving through digital humanities spaces and other spaces. I do think it's important we not just think of this as a digital humanities question too, by the way. And I'm going to be showing you objects that largely do live on online spaces, but I don't first see this as a question of the digital humanities, this question of what forms we produce. But there's a lot of people that have been collecting amazing things and they want people to see them. So there's a ton of examples out there like this. One just came across my desk yesterday. Tom Levin doing a work on the history of this very interesting phenomenon of people that would record actual albums on a site and send them through the mail, voicemail of another kind. And he's started writing a examination of this, and then decided these need to be online. And so he's got this great collection of these actual records in every form, including transcription, for you to listen to and see. Much smaller, more humbler effort. A colleague of mine at Virginia Commonwealth started this British Virginia effort, where he was already working on these old colonial era sermons there in Virginia, and he was already having to do a lot of transcription of those. So he's creating these very lo-fi PDFs that you can now search these things because of how they've created them. And of course, some of that for machine learning would take some time to actually do some OCR, optical character recognition, on these texts. They're just doing it by hand, just releasing these through the library. They made a little imprint for it, just putting them out there, sharing the archives as well as their arguments about them. This project to transcribe Bentham's texts. It's a participatory collective project that's going on in London. These, in my understanding, none of these folks behind these projects are first coming at this from a library science, information science, or museum studies perspective. They're first coming to it as scholars, seeing a collection of objects that they would love to see out there, that they're already studying, and finding a way to get it out there. From someone who used to be here, Jordana Mendelsohn, was doing a work on these magazines in Spain, and in fact, we have some Illinois imprints on some of this. Just got the magazines up there, made them browsable, in addition to her scholarly book about them. And a little more unconventionally, the T Races project, studying the history of redlining and racially based zoning in American cities. There's a huge corpus of scanned documents actually demonstrating how neighborhoods were analyzed by the FHA according to race. These folks decided, let's not only get them online, let's make them navigable by map. Now, you could begin to talk about some of these as forming arguments in their archives, but at the very least, it's worth thinking from maybe some of your projects about what archives might emerge from your work that you'd want to get out there in the world. Another approach to publishing in new forms might be to think about the process of developing a tool as a process of discovery in your own work, right? So some of these archives kind of happen, they get made alongside of a scholarly argument. Other folks say, we need a tool to even do this project, so let's make that. That'll be and the tool will be our published form. Just one example of this that I thought was an early one and an interesting one. One of the first projects funded by the NEH Digital Humanities Startup Project Fund, which is the Cinemetrics platform. You can go online and open this website and open up a movie that you're working on as a cinema studies scholar, and quickly, kind of through a few button pushes, figure out the whole structure of your film according to shot length and shot description, right? So you're just sort of pushing a couple buttons here, and then you end up with an analysis of your film when it's done, according to how long the shot was, and was it a long shot, close-up shot, these kinds of things. And for one kind of analysis of film, they felt like they needed this view of what's actually going on, a kind of certain kind of DNA of a cinematic structure. So they released the tool as they published that and let other people use it. Address of new audiences is another theme I've seen a lot come up in this question of publishing new forms. Folks that want to get some piece of their work in front of other groups, either other disciplines or folks outside the academy altogether. Alex Wellerstein is in so many ways a colleague of mine, even though we've not been in the same institution. He's someone who does work on nuclear testing. And he's released a series of these online projects to help people understand the impact of these particular weapons. So his nuke map was a project where, based on his research of the yields of some of the more obscure nuclear weapons that have figured in international policy, you can drop a bomb on a particular city and study its actual effects and radius. Things that actually civil defense was producing versions of in the 50s. But he's made these very popularized kind of objects which allow a different entry point into his scholarship for folks. These things get millions of hits. People trying these out, sharing them on social media. I think Sharon Daniels' work on incarceration in California also was a good example of this. Sharon, sorry, you can't see much of that here. Sharon has a project called Public Secrets, published through Vectors, which is USC's sort of digital media journal. And she wanted to get a piece out there that typographically and interactively allowed people in to think about life on the inside, life on the outside, the kind of spatial implications of an incarceration-based society. And this project, I think, really thought about different audiences from that point, almost like creating a popular version of some of her more scholarly texts. And then a real leader in this question of new audiences from an archival standpoint is the New York Public Library. Their labs are a great place to visit online to see what they're up to. They're always thinking of new ways to get people interested in the process of organizing their archive. So their What's on the Menu project was one of their first successful examples here, where they have the world's largest collection of menus at the New York Public Library, very much beyond the range of optical character recognition and automatic reading and searching of these things. So they've come up with a really great interface that lets people just log on. They're presented with a single line from a menu, and they're asked, "What do you see? Please read it." And people say, "Oh, that looks really great. That's, that's this." And slowly they're getting a searchable version of their catalog through appealing to the enjoyment of kind of tourism through the menus of the world. So other audiences, thinking about what piece of your project might really, do you want to get out to other folks, might be of interest to other folks. And one other motivation I've seen out there for these new forms would be people that are interested in thinking about new forms because they want to see new forms of review. And this goes back to this question of knowledge infrastructures, right? And there's a ton of examples out there like this. An early one that's very simple was this project for an issue of a medieval cultural studies journal called Post-Medieval. The editors did a crowdsourced review, public review, open crowd review, I think is what they call it at the time. This is 2006 or 7 even, but I put it up here because it was just a blog interface. They allowed, they put up each article for this journal with numbers by each paragraph and had a commenting system in a blog form for people to offer their reviews. And it still ended up in a traditional journal and traditionally printed and PDF'd through JSTOR and everything else. But the review process itself, they wanted to see something different. And there's a ton of these out there now, but just wanted to kind of signal to that. So you've already seen some examples of what. I'm not going to show as many examples here. I'm just going to sort of stick with a few more rubric points here and then turn it over to Maria. So what might you do? Of course, the interactive digital object is prominent in some of what I've shown you. But I'd hate to see it thought of only in those terms. Again, I don't think this has to be about making digital versions of scholarship. This is about these other questions of what do we want to make and for whom. And in some ways, I think this conversation can include this question of new routes for traditional forms, new ways of getting even the most traditionally framed essays, articles, books out through new paths of review, through new paths of consumption and readership. And then we might also think about, I would hope you'd think about, as an artist, other kinds of forms that come out of these collaborations as well. The event, the exhibition, the performance, the film. This is an area I'm particularly excited about because of how many artists I know, and artists broadly speaking, dance, performance, visual art, the whole design, the whole realm, who really see their work as participating in a research-based approach and who are depending on research by you all to get this work done and out there with integrity. And so we could point to a lot of examples of this. I'll point one recent one out that some of you may have seen a couple of years ago. Terry Capsalis came and presented her hysterical alphabet performance as a Millercom lecture. Does anybody remember that? Yeah. So I brought it up as an example that was local in part because Terry is researching the history of the medicalization of women's bodies. She's writing about that in a scholarly format. And she's putting on a performance, multimedia, video, monologue, music, that's collaborative sort of exploration of that material. It's not like the popular version of the scholarly text in this way. It's one of many objects that she and her collaborators felt this material needed to explore this topic. So I would certainly think about this as well, and we can talk in the discussion about what that might look like. Last piece here. So how do you get this stuff? How would you even get it done? There are an increasing amount of existing platforms and tools for some of these things. I'm happy to say, compared to 5 years ago, it's a world of difference in terms of what's available. And at IPRH, we tried to explore some of this through our affiliation with Scalar, which some of you have heard plenty about from me. But we have a really great relationship with this emerging platform that enables us to look at archives and arguments, or as arguments, in a way that has increasing possibilities for presentation in peer-reviewed settings. But there's a lot of platforms and tools, and we're very fortunate to have people like Harriet Green here in the Scholarly Commons that can really help you navigate what the existing platforms are. But another way to do this is to find a collaborator in another discipline, and especially across in the arts and the practice-based disciplines, who might be really keen to look at these projects with you. Or the last is just think about this as a hired expertise kind of piece, and some of these projects are just that. So someone who doesn't know how to make a certain thing, they know they want it to happen, and they apply for money to get the staff to do it, or even to develop it into an educational project where students are part of that. All these pieces raise issues. How do you structure a project that way? How do you manage it? How do you divide the labor equitably? All these things, stuff I'd be happy to talk about that I'm messing up on every day. So I'll end there, but hopefully this can give you a kind of rubric a bit to think about how to proceed if you're feeling a little bit at the beginning of these potential spaces. And I'll turn it over to Maria. Thanks.
While Maria's getting her presentation up, there's a few things I forgot to say at the beginning. One is that one of the reasons we're talking about publishing right now is that with these grants, with the Global Midwest grants, we will need to be able to have some outcomes that we can demonstrate rather rapidly. We definitely, of course, want to move toward another phase of this grant to get another round of funding for it. And we know that humanities and art scholarship takes different kinds of time, right? It happens at different paces depending on what you're doing. And so what Maria is going to be talking about, what Kevin led into, is talking about what we hope will be a way for people to think about getting their work out there using some non-traditional means, or means that might not be familiar to you, that are kind of at least a stage of an outcome, if not what you ultimately plan to have your project become. So we're just trying to put out there some different ways of thinking about what in the grant world are called deliverables, right? That's not how we think about our work often in the humanities. But just to think about, how will we demonstrate that we're doing something with this funding? How will we make our work available to other people? And are there these new and exciting ways to think about doing that, as Kevin just showed us? I also just want to briefly point out to you, as I should have done at the beginning, that Jason has very helpfully prepared several handouts. So he's printed out the FAQ stuff from our website. People have been, as we've gotten questions from people in the consortium about this initiative, he's put together an FAQ on our website. Of course you can look there, but if you just want to have it here, there's a lot of great things. And you can refer to this too maybe this afternoon as you're working in smaller groups. He has also printed out for you here the request for proposals for the Global Midwest. You can take a look at that and remember that the application deadline is October 30th. And then finally he's printed out the projects that are listed on our project registry wiki so that you can just easily refer to it and see what colleagues at other consortium institutions are interested in working on. They've posted things here because they're interested in having collaborators. Some of them have already found collaborators but would welcome more. But it also gives you just a sense of the scope of the different kinds of work that people are interested in doing. Having something on the registry does not mean that they have funding or are getting funding. It just means this is something that they're interested in pursuing. So I wanted to point those things out to you. So with that, Maria.
Hi. I'm excited to be here, both because I think this effort is intrinsically interesting and because of my own checkered past. I spent about a decade in the academy as a literary scholar before becoming a librarian, before becoming a publisher. But that means my heart still thrills a bit when I'm in a room full of humanists. So it's great to be here. I also have to say, Kevin and I, apart from a little flurry of email in the past few days where we said, I'm kind of doing this, what about you? You could bring in the computer, did not coordinate on our presentations, but I am delighted and interested to see how much they, I hope I'll say, complement each other, not repeat each other. But I think we've come to the same point in our thinking in many cases without speaking much. So as Dianne indicated when she introduced me, I worked in publishing at Michigan for close to 20 years, I have to say. And there I was charged with encouraging, supporting, advising university-based publishing efforts, both technologically and in terms of business or economic models, and also working with scholars to figure out what it is they wanted to do and how they might do it in terms of getting their work out. As part of my gig doing that, I made a point of whenever a new campus-based effort started up, like Humanities Without Walls, I'd make sure to get an appointment with the director and go in and I'd say, so tell me about your publishing strategy. And this often led to furrowed brows. And sometimes the answer was, oh, publish what we can, when we can, best place we can. But it sometimes led to, publishing strategy. What might that be? And so I would encourage those people, and I often left with them thinking, what a good idea, publishing strategy. Thinking about how their program wanted to publish in a way that aligned with the goals of the program and with the goals of the scholars who were actually doing the research. How might they go about that? And one thing I found that might be interesting in this context was one of the goals that often came up was, well, we'd like to be a lot more global. We'd like to be seen outside the boundaries of who knows each other in the discipline, outside the boundaries of North America. What are some ways we can do that? So often when I left, I would say, so think about, and these are the questions Kevin asked, why do you want to publish? And how do you want to publish it? And then let's get together and talk some more, and we can see, we can work on that how. And things that often came up, and I think would come up in this room too, and this accompanies the notion of being global. Often people wanted to maximize the reach of their research, get it out as far and wide as possible, sometimes to non-academic audiences as well as academic audiences, sometimes to scholars in other countries. Minimizing costs was often a goal too. How can we get the stuff out in the most economical way? Making a persuasive argument. Well, we all want to do that when we report on our research, but are there ways in which publishing online might help make that argument? What form might best suit my argument? And of course, many people are also interested in supporting their professional careers. So we didn't want to advise publication in any way that would damage that. So what's the best way to support professional advancement? And I would also encourage people, as I would, and as Kevin has, do you want to publish differently? And what do we mean by differently? And generally what I meant by differently was through a process that results in something other than these fairly traditional and well-beloved, for good reason, objects. Do we want something different than this, either as an alternative or as a complement to this? And I'll talk more about complementing this. People wanted to enrich their arguments, and that's through the inclusion of things like archives, what I tend to call rich illustration, which may be literal illustration or maybe the inclusion of many kinds of things. Many scholars who are invested in thinking about scholarly communication want to change up the economics, don't feel like the economics are working particularly well. Things aren't getting published because, hey, who's going to buy that? Or things do get published and then they are priced, the books are priced at a level that makes it unapproachable by certainly the general public, anybody other than libraries and specialists, and even the specialists might say, I don't know. And I think that in tandem with that, there's an interest in publishing in a way that values knowledge worth over market worth. Okay, so maybe the sales predictions are small because it's a fairly arcane area of knowledge. Doesn't mean it's not important. We want the work to be out there so that it is ready to be picked up by those who can use it. So those are some of the motivators. And I would suggest that the publishing business as it is currently constituted does not necessarily help us in meeting those goals. I have been a publisher. I ran a university press, and I have the deepest respect for the work and the passion those people bring to their work. But they are struggling with a difficult market, and the business models are uneasy, I would say, at this point, and don't always meet the goals of scholars. So what I would say here in this room is that those involved in Humanities Without Walls are at a moment of opportunity. And it's a moment of opportunity to be deliberate about publishing strategies. What do we want to publish? Why? How? And to think about that self-consciously. And also a moment when innovation is possible if innovation is valued. That we can think about what is it that we want to do differently and how might we do that. And it's also an opportunity to take control of the publication process. And I'll speak in a minute about how publishing can sometimes seem a bit mysterious and arcane. Okay, I wrote something, now what's going to happen? But that there are many areas in which we see the academy and scholars taking control of that process. And that's partly because of the technology that's available to us. Digital technology, networked communication has made a large difference in this area. There's a lot you can buy now. Kevin talked about what you can hire. Certainly there are people, but there's also a lot of business services. You can get Amazon to print your books and put them on Amazon if you know how to broker the deal. And there are people who are ready to help you with that. And that's the last point I would make before we talk a little bit more about what publishing is and how we want to do it. We're also at a moment where there are a lot of interesting partnership models emerging between scholars and the others. And I have to say this because I'm a librarian and it was my world. An increasing number of research libraries are expressing willingness and commitment to supporting publication as a core part of their work. That they see that as a natural extension of the way in which they have always helped scholars. There's actually a library publishing coalition now of, I think, some 50 libraries, research libraries, who feel like they're committed enough to assisting with publication that they've said, yeah, we'll pay our dues, we'll go to a meeting every year, we're here to do that. And I know that our own library, I happen to be married to the director, so I can tell you this, is increasingly interested in this area as well, and interested in innovative partnerships around publishing. So, publishing, How do we feel about publishing? Well, I think I'm safe in a room full of academics saying most of us have a point in our lives said, I love books. And that they hold a very special place in our heart. And probably pretty early on in our lives, we romanticized the process by which books come into the world. And I know for myself, around age 8, published author, that would be so cool. And I still celebrate with my friends when their books hit the streets or the screen, when publication happens. But that it is also, so it's a bit romantic and it's a bit mysterious again. So we send a manuscript or a proposal hopefully out into the world, and then something happens. And the first thing that happens is maybe it gets approved to move forward, and that's exciting. And then a bunch of other things happen that we may or may not have our hands on. And eventually there is a deliverable. Something goes out into the world. But I can, to my tiny little bit to demystify this, I taught a course this past spring called Publishing as an Information Profession, where I was encouraging students at GISLIS to think about publishing as part of the information world and how they might be part of it. And this is the slide that I made them look at every class, as they will tell you. They were tasked with publishing something in the course of the semester, and they had to have their hands on every step. So I'd say that over a long period of time, if you look at the history of publishing and the current practice, we can pretty much sort it into these functions. Publishers acquire, they select, recruit, encourage the development of work. Publishers usually, and in my world, good publishers help develop the publication so it's better, get your ideas so that they meet your intended audience in a better way. They produce, and production can be a whole bundle of things, from proofreading to layout, design, arranging, printing, getting things to a screen, but they take it through that process from whatever, your Word file, your Google Doc. They get you to the point of actually having something that is formatted and ready for people to engage with. Publishers promote and market material. They help people know that it is available, and that they can buy it in some worlds, or read it for free in others. They actually get it into the hands of the reader, the user. And publishers often engage in assessment. Commercial publishers have to do this because they have to figure out their business. We thought it would sell 100 copies. We thought it would sell 500 copies. It sold 20. Why? Or, hey, Harvard University Press with Capital this year. We thought of 500. It's kind of what a university press does. Oh my God, we can't keep it on the shelf. Right? So they do that for their own business purposes. They do it for making future decisions about how to allocate their capacity. And they do it for their authors, who need to know, my book sold X copies, my book was cited this many times, my web page got this many hits, to help provide evidence of their scholarly trajectory and their reach. So these are things that publishers do, and I would say these are all good things. I value all of these things and the people who do them. And I think that for most publications, somebody has to step in and do these things. But what I would encourage you to think about as you think about your own publishing strategy is that doesn't mean I have to find a publisher. A publisher is the only one who can do these things. The question is, who's going to do it? How do we divide the labor? I think it's a division of labor. And in my past work with university publishing, a lot of the discussion and negotiation was about the division of labor. We need somebody to design the cover. Who's going to design the cover? Do you have about $2,000 or whatever a cover was costing at that point? Yes, no, and then how do we find the money to do that? So I think that as we think about publication, it's important to step through something like this list of functions and see how they're covered, and then talk about who might do them. So what I'd like to do at this point is to show a few models, and some of these will echo the models that Kevin has shown us. Yeah, there we go. Of innovative publishing projects, I believe they're innovative, that I've been involved with, that I'm fond of, and that I think show some interesting things. So I want to begin with the Open Humanities Press. This was started by a small group of, I won't call them renegade, but young humanists who were interested in the question of how do the values and the motives for open access publishing that we've seen get a lot of traction in the sciences and in journals, how do they apply to humanities and to books? And so they decided that they wanted to do books that were free online, that also had a print version, and that were free online from the moment of publication, but that were supported by the activities and principles that we generally associate with something like university press publishing. And they were also motivated by, in this case, the fact that they felt like the market for books on critical theory was underserved, that it was having a harder and harder time being published because it was seen as arcane, difficult to read, wasn't going to reach an audience. And so they wanted to find a way to get this material out into the world. I'm going to pass a few of the print instantiations around. I had my hands on all of these. I'm proud of them. But also because, and I'll do this for a while, I want to break down the print-digital dichotomy. I don't think we have to be in one world or another. So these are books that result at the same time as the online instantiation. They are, aside from a very, very small starting run so that the author and her mother and those people can have a copy, they are only printed at the point of purchase. So there's no inventory sitting anywhere. But they are ready to go from the first moment. And OHP doesn't do comp copies for possible classroom adoption because they're free online. You can look at them. And then once somebody actually adopts a book for a course, they do send a comp copy. So I'll pass those around. But I think, and this may be in part due to the participation of a pretty talented designer, they have enough artifactual value that they meet some of the requirements of what people have called the funk factor. Here's the thing that got made. And one thing I want to call out about Open Humanities Press is when they started, and it was a small group of students who were recent doctorates from SUNY Buffalo, which just by coincidence happens to be my doctoral institution as well, which is part of the reason my heart warmed to them from the beginning. They wanted to make sure that they established the credibility of this imprint, not just a bunch of doctoral students starting something up, whatever. So certainly the books go through a traditional peer review process, but what they worked really hard on, and what's interesting to me, and what I call your attention to, is this editorial board. And if you skim that, I would venture you'll see a number of names that you recognize. Pretty large figures in the world of contemporary theory. And that was their feeling in order to establish credibility. So this underwent quality review. So they have a number of series. Some of their series are directed by various people on the editorial board. People on the editorial board serve as reviewers. And the editorial board has also been a good conduit for getting the word out, for advocating for the imprint. And that, to me, is intriguing in thinking about publication outcomes for Humanities Without Walls, because the program itself has assembled all of you who are distinguished figures in the humanities, and can think about mechanisms for lending editorial credibility to anything that might come out of Humanities Without Walls. Let's see. Also, we just want to call your attention to what they call their labs. An experimental space for the OHP community to explore new forms of scholarly communication and develop future models of theoretically informed critique. So they are self-conscious about their practice in terms of how they're communicating, as well as their editorial practice. A second model, and we started this under my watch in Michigan, that bears some similarities to Open Humanities Press, but not entirely, is called Digital Culture Books. And Digital Culture Books, which is a University of Michigan Press imprint in collaboration with the library, was an effort to explore what happens when we put books online for free and put them in print for sale, and how can we use the digital environment to enhance the argument, to enrich the scholarship and the research that is upon which is being reported. And I worked closely with the staff of the press on this. I will not pretend they weren't nervous. We're going to give these books away? So how does that work? But they also felt that it was time. They thought our authors want to move into the digital world, or if they've moved there already, they want to bring it with them to their book. How are we going to do that? And the library was able to provide some support for that question. So a couple of things here that all of these books have an online presence. They're all free to read online from the moment they're published. Many of them take advantage of that digital delivery because in many cases they want to have rich media. In some cases, the openness is the incentive for the author. They're writing a pretty traditional linear argument that works just fine in print, but again, the reach. It's like I want it to be as available as possible. So that was why authors were incentivized to join with this in print. So just a quick example. Where is the one I want? Oh, I should have bookmarked the show all titles. This is what I want. And you can see one of the things that convinced the press of the value of this imprint was that scholars who were working in the world of digital studies quickly saw it as intriguing that the press would support them in their publication aims. And you can see that a number of the titles are Writing History in the Digital Age, Approaches to Scholarship and Teaching from the Digital Humanities. Somewhat different take. I'd just like to pull up the Unreal Estate Guide to Detroit. And again, I'll just pass around print versions of these books. So you can buy the book or read for free online. We actually wanted to get T-shirts made up at one point that said this. See if this loads up. What I'd like to show is that the book provides the online book provides the opportunity for taking advantage of digital affordances. So because of the nature of the content, it has many, many more photographs supporting the book than you would find in most scholarly monographs. And publishing those photographs in print, the way in which the author would have liked them printed, would have been exorbitantly expensive and resulted in a very high list price. So the photographs are not in the book, but they are throughout the text online. So in some ways, it's like sharing the archives that Kevin talked about, but it's sharing them in the course of the argument. And while we're talking about sharing archives and publication projects, I really like this one. This was from our Center for History and Medicine, the Influenza Encyclopedia. And the medical historians were interested in the Great American Influenza Epidemic. And they were particularly interested in what they called escape communities. What were the communities that were lightly touched by the influenza epidemic? And can we figure out why? So they did extensive what they called biographies of cities during the influenza epidemic, looking at mortality rates, and looking through what I would call, I'm not sure if it's a term of art, social history documents, diaries, letters, local newspapers, to see if they could locate commonalities in the escape communities. Oh, look, they all canceled sporting events. Schools were closed within 3 days of the first outbreak, and with the hope that this might guide decision-making in the case of a future epidemic. So they employed a small army of graduate students, sent them out to all these cities to go through archives and museums, attics in some cases, dig up these materials and digitize them. And then they got to the point of publication. And they wanted a well-edited and proofread articles about each city that they could share. They wanted to link those to their archives, and they also wanted to make those archives available to others who might be able to do additional research on the epidemic and contribute to their own work. So this is the encyclopedia as it came up. You can go to a city, let's go home, close to home, and read a pretty traditional text on that. That's illustrated. You can also browse the archive. And you can do that in a number of ways. And once you find an image, you can blow it up, you can print a PDF, do those kinds of things that you can do with images online. You could also do searches. But it's a way of both sharing the archive and having a linked publication that I think just about anybody would recognize as a publication. This has been well organized, put together. One last model, and this is just to move away from the worlds of books to journals for a minute. This is the Trans-Asian Photography Review, which we did in collaboration with Hampshire College. And as you would expect from the title, it's dedicated to the study of Asian photography. And for this group, there were two particular incentives. Openness was important because they really valued global reach, as you would expect from the content. They wanted both a reader and author community that was much larger than the English-speaking world. And also because it's about visual culture, they wanted it to be visual in a way that print would probably make unaffordable. And that's the thing. Print, getting it outside of North American research libraries might be tricky. So they wanted an online publication. They do a couple of things that a traditional journal might not do. So they have refereed articles the way we recognize them from journals. They are particularly interested in translations, non-English speakers who are working on Asian photography, and they review those as well. Welcome those. In some cases, they have a variety of grant mechanisms by which they locate funding to afford translations if they can't find a translator. So that was one thing they did. But then they also have this curatorial projects, which are also refereed, but they're more of a refereed building of an online exhibit than a traditional journal article. So here's Tickled, Photography and Humor. And in the question work for hire, they really valued attractive design. I think it is an attractive design. And so in their startup funding, which they eventually located from Hampshire College, we need a designer who's going to work on the website, make it look pretty. So there's explanatory text with the exhibit, and there are images, as you would expect from a photography exhibit. You can look at them online, or if you would like to interact with them more fully, you can come to the image viewer. Let's make it bigger. Pan around on it. There are also ways of searching through whatever information the curator has provided about that. And again, these are available in a separate kind of way from the traditional publication. So I enjoy this picture, so we'll leave that there. So these are some possible models of a newish form publication. But what is interesting to me about them and why I share them with you is, what are we trying to achieve here? What ends are being served? And where are those ends best supported? Who can do it? How do we divide up the work? And I think of that as very much part of the mission of the Academy, and I think this is why libraries are particularly interested in this area now, to figure out how to help scholars do that. One challenge I would anticipate and would raise for you to think about, and I addressed this a little bit when I talked about Open Humanities Press, is that there continues to be a degree of nervousness about professional and institutional acknowledgement of achievement and impact in new form publishing. And I think that needs to be baked into any publication plan, that from the beginning, the publishers, and I use that term broadly, need to think about how to define and collect the metrics that might be needed to help assess the value. And I would also argue for transparency in editorial principles, that it should be well documented and available. This is why we chose to publish this, and that could be it's undergone a stringent peer review process as we traditionally understand it. It could be because the scholars who have created this are affiliated with X program and they had to work pretty hard to get there, but that the important thing is to share those principles, so when those scholars are trying to document the value of their publication, that's available to people who might be reviewing it. And I think it's also incumbent upon all of us who are engaged in these new models of publication to engage the Academy ourselves. And how do we establish the value? How do we signal respect for this work? That means talking to deans and provosts and department chairs. It means talking among ourselves, and I think that needs to be an ongoing conversation. So I'll stop there, but I guess I would conclude where I began, which is by inviting you all at this point to be self-conscious in your publishing strategy. And I certainly stand by to help, and I know many others that do. So please. And I can't stay for lunch because I have to take care of a kid. But I'm here. Dianne knows how to find me. So any follow-up questions I'm not here to answer, please send me email, give me a call, and I'll be right back in touch. Thank you.